الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين ومن اتبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. To proceed, today's lesson بإذن الله تعالى we are going to discuss a very interesting and important subject with regards to Arabic grammar and its analysis. And in fact, it's connected to our very first lesson in which I introduced the three states of Al-I'rab, which as we know is marfu'un, mansubun and majrurun, in addition to the fourth which was mentioned in a later lesson, which is majzumun. And each one of them has a particular vowel which indicates its state. So we know that marfu'un is recognized by ad-dammah, and mansubun is recognized by al-fathah, and majrurun is recognized by al-kasrah, and the majzumun state is recognized by the sukoon. And they change, so a word, an ismun, will alter from being marfu'un to mansubun to majrurun and majzumun depending upon the amilun that enters upon it. So if we have an ismun such as kitabun that is affected by fi'lun, which is our amilun, then it will become mansubun, it will become kitaban. And if our ismun kitabun is affected by a harfu jarrin, which in this instance is our amilun, it will become kitabin. And if it's we have a fi'lun such as yaktubu, which is affected by a negation such as a harfu nafyin lam, it becomes yaktub with a sukoon. So that's something that we've mentioned in our previous lessons. So what follows on from that is to understand something called the three types of al-i'rab. So we've mentioned the four states or ahwal. Now we need to speak about the three types of al-i'rabun, or al-i'rabu rather. So where do we begin? أنواع الإعراب. أنواع الإعراب. That's an idafa construct, of course. So what do we mean by أنواع الإعراب? You may have heard me mentioning, particularly when we're analyzing a statement, the phrase في محل رفع or في محل نصب or في محل جر. That is a type of al-i'rab that we have not spoken about specifically. Right? What we have done at the very beginning is we've spoken about a type of al-i'rabu that becomes manifest based upon the ending of the ismun. So as we just mentioned, the example of kitabun, kitaban and kitabin. That is the first type of naw'un min anwa' al-i'rabi, and it's called al-lafzi. So the first is called اللفظي. اللفظي, it relates to when the state of the ismun is manifest upon the final letter of the word itself, such as kitabun. We say that kitabun is marfu'un. And if we were to ask ourselves, well, what's the indicator What's the alamatu raf'ihi? The indicator that it is marfu'un. We say that the indicator of it being marfu'un is ad-dammatu, ad-dhahiratu, ad-dammah, which is apparent, ad-dhahiratu, fi or ala akhirihi. In this case, it's tanweenu dammin. So if we were to say al-kitab, and then we'll remove a damma, we would now say that the indicator of it being marfu'un is ad-dammatu ad-dhahiratu fi akhirihi, at the end of the word on the final letter. If we enter a fi'lun upon it, kataba, then it changes from al-kitabu to al-kitaba. And again, if we were to ask ourselves, what is the indicator that it is mansubun, we would say alamatu nasbihi al-fathatu al-dhahiratu fi akhirihi. We said that the indicator is a fatha, which is dhahiratu, which is apparent, manifest upon the end. And the final one, of course, is if there is a kasra, then we would say fi al-kitabi. And if we were to ask ourselves what is the indicator that it is in the majrurun state, we would say alamatu jarrihi. The indicator of it being majrur is al-kasratu al-dhahiratu fi akhirihi, a kasra upon the end. Now, in each of these three instances, the state, the grammatical state, is manifest upon the final letter, the end of the word. And therefore, that type of al-i'rab is called al-lafzi. It is called al-lafzi. And it is present in an ismun, which is what we call mu'rabun. Mu'rabun means one that alters depending upon the amilun, the actor that's acting upon it, and that's called mu'rabun. And ismun, which is mu'rabun, or a fi'lun, which is mu'rabun, is one that changes as a result of what's been acted upon it. So to give another example, therefore, if we were to say Ja'a Zaydun. Ja'a Zaydun. That is an example of what type of sentence? Al-jumlatul fi'liyatu. Right? Ja'a fi'lun madin mabniyun ala al-fathi. We say it's a fi'lun madin, past tense verb, which is fixed upon a fatha. But what we're concerned of is concerning Zaydun. What role does Zaydun have in this sentence? Well, we know that Zaydun is the fa'ilun. The fa'ilun, the doer. The fa'ilun is always marfu'un. And in this instance, alamatu raf'ihi, the indicator of it being marfu'un, is ad-dammatu ad-dhahiratu fi akhirihi. It's the damma which is present upon the end of the ismun. Now, it's marfu in this instance. If we were to say, for example, akrama aliyun, akrama aliyun zaydan. Now in this instance, Zaydan takes a fatha or tanweenu fathin in this instance, but this is a fatha. Why has Zaydan moved from being marfu'un to being mansubun? Because it's now the object, the maf'ulun bihi of akrama. So akrama aliyun zaydan means that Ali honored Zaydan, and therefore Zaydan is now mansubun. He's the maf'ulun bihi of akrama. So we've changed from Zaydun to Zaydan because of akrama. Now, if we were to ask ourselves what is the indicator for it being mansubun, we would say the indicator for it being mansubun is al-fathatu al-dhahiratu fi akhirihi, which is something that we know, right? And the third example would be marra aliyun bi zaydin. In the third example, zaydin is now majrurun. Why? Because it's following a harfu jar, and therefore it is now majrurun. In this example, if we were to ask ourselves what is the indicator for it being majrurun, we would say alamatu jarrihi al-kasratu al-dhahiratu fi akhirihi. It is a kasrah which is apparent upon the end. So this type or naw'un min al-i'rabi is called al-lafzi al-dhahiri. It's a lafzi, so it's pronounced and it's read and it's dhahiri, it's apparent, manifest. This type of i'rab, al-lafzi, we have already discussed in great detail. So that is something that you should all, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, be familiar with, right? So the second type of i'rabun or naw'un min al-i'rabi is what we call التقديري. تقديري. التقديري. What that means is it's an assumed state of i'rab. Whereas lafzi is manifest and apparent upon the end of the word on the final letter, at-taqdiri is assumed to be there. What do we mean by assumed to be there? If we use the example that we just wrote, ja'a. Rather than saying ja'a zaydun, we want to say ja'a al-fata. Ja'a al-fata. What does ja'a al-fata mean? Well, we know ja'a means he came. Al-fata means the youth, right? Al-fata means the youth. Now, ja'a is a fi'lun madin mabniyun al-fathi. Because it's a fi'lun, we know this type of sentence is a jumlatul fi'liyatu. Jumlatul fi'liyatu must comprise of two parts, fi'lun and fa'ilun. So there's our fi'lun. Where is our fa'ilun? Where is our dua? Our dua is al-fata, because we want to convey the meaning of the youth came. Ja'a al-fata. Now, what's the issue? The first issue that we have. That is that the fa'ilun, we say, and have been saying for a long time, in fact this should be ingrained in your minds, that the fa'ilun is always marfu'un. Right, and the indicator so far, al-lafzi, that we've seen is that the marfu'un state is recognized by a dhamma, right? Now, where is the dhamma on the end of al-fata? It's not there. Why is it not there? Because this alif here, called alif al-maqsura, cannot accommodate a vowel sign. It cannot accommodate a dhammatu or al-fathatu or al-kasratu. It cannot take it. Therefore, we cannot say that the indicator of al-fatha being marfu'un is الضمة الظاهرة على آخره. We cannot say that because there isn't a fatha on the end. So how do the grammarians describe al-fatha? They say, and this is the important bit, that it is the fa'ilun, it is marfu'un, but alamatu raf'ihi ad-dammatu al-muqaddaratu. They say that it is ad-dammatu al-muqaddaratu fi akhirihi. That's how they now describe it. That al-fatha is the fa'ilun. It is marfu'un wa alamatu raf'ihi. The indicator of it being marfu'un is ad-dammatu al-muqaddaratu fi akhirihi. So the difference between التقديري and اللفظي is that in التقديري it's assumed to be there, whereas in اللفظي it's apparent. So if we mention, for example, al-fatha in the mansubun state and say, as we said earlier on, akrama aliyun al-fatha, then how would we analyze this statement? We say akrama fi'lun madin mabniyun al-fathi. We know that it means he honored. Who honored? Fa'ilun is always marfu'un and aliyun is marfu'un. The indicator of aliyun being marfu'un is ad-dammatu ad-dahiratu fi akhirihi. We know that. But al-fatha now, which is the maf'ulun bihi, and the maf'ulun bihi, as we have been saying from the beginning, that it is always mansubun. But, and the indicator for being mansubun is al-fatha. If it's al-lafzi, it's al-fathatu al-dhahiratu. But can we place a fatha on the alif al-maqsura here? No, we can't, because it can't accommodate it. So it is therefore assumed to be there. What prevents it from appearing, al-mani', that which is an obstacle from it appearing, is that the alif al-alif al-maqsura cannot accommodate a vowel sign. So it's a taqdeeri. And the third example would be for al-fatha to be in the majrurun state. So we could say marra aliyun bil fatha. Marra is fi'lun madin mabniyun al-fathi, meaning he passed. Who passed? The fa'ilun is always marfu', and the indicator here of it being aliyun is ad-dammatu al-dhahiratu fi akhirihi. Now, aliyun passed by whom? Al-fatha. The youth. The youth is preceded by bi, which is harfu jar. Therefore, al-fatha must be majrurun, as we know that harfu jarrin yajurru al-isma. It renders the noun that follows it majrurun. But in this instance, despite it being majrurun, like in the other examples, it's not a lafzi. We cannot place a kasra underneath. It's assumed to therefore be, well, it is a taqdeeri. So we say that bi harfu jarrin al-fatha ismun majrurun wa alamatu jarrihi al-kasratu al-muqaddaratu fi akhirihi. It's assumed to be there. Right? So that is the second type of i'rabun, where it is assumed to be there. Third type of i'rabun is what we call المحلي. المحلي, it refers to a positional i'rab. So a word that occupies the position of a particular state. So how do we illustrate this? If we take our jumlatul fi'liya beginning with ja'a, and we want to say these came, as in these people came. Ja'a, came. These, we need an ismul isharah, and these is ha'ula'i. Ha'ula'i. This is our sentence, complete sentence. Fi'lun and fa'ilun, comprising of our jumlatul fi'liyah. Now, what do we note? We note that ha'ula'i occupies the position of the fa'ilun. If we were to ask what is the indicator of it being the fa'ilun, which ought to be marfu'un, as we now know with complete certainty, we cannot say alamatu raf'ihi ad-dammatu al-zahiratu ala akhirihi. Why not? Because ha'ula'i, this ismun, is mabniyun. It's not mu'rabun. It doesn't ever change. It's mabniyun. The Arabs, they, when they articulate this word, they always do so with it being, having a kasrah on the end. So they always say ha'ula'i. It can never be ha'ula'u or ha'ula'a. It is always ha'ula'i. That is why we say that it is mabniyun ala al-kasri. It's fixed upon the kasra, despite being an ismun. And that's really interesting, isn't it? That despite being an ismun, it's always fixed upon the kasra. But how therefore do we explain it in our jumlat al-fi'liyah, taking into account that this is now our fa'il? We say Ja'a fi'lun madin mabniyun ala al-fathi, we know that, he came. How do we describe ha'ula'i now? We say that it is fi mahalli raf'in fa'ilun. We say fi mahalli raf'in, and that's the shahid, or what's important. Fi mahalli raf'in fa'ilun. This is how we now describe ha'ula'i. We say it is fi mahalli, in a position of raf'in, being marfu'un as the fa'ilun, as the doer. That is how we would now resolve this issue of ha'ula'i apparently having a kasra but occupying the position of the fa'ilun, therefore having to be marfu'un fi mahalli raf'in fa'ilun. So it's not particularly complicated. We just have to remember that where we have an ismun that is mabniyun, then we say that it occupies the position of being marfu'un as a fa'il. If we were to say, for example, akrama Zaydun ha'ula'i. Akrama, we know, fi'lun madin mabniyun ala al-fathi, he honored. Who honored? Who is the doer here? We said that the doer is Zaydun. We know Zaydun is a doer because of the indicator of him being marfu'un with a dhammah, which is dhahiratun ala akhirihi. But ha'ula'i, which is now the maf'ulun bihi. How do we recognize it to be the maf'ulun bihi? Not with a fatha, which is the ordinary indicator for being mansuban, but we recognize it as being mansubun, and we say it is fi mahalli nasbin maf'ulun bihi. So we say fi mahalli nasbin, fi mahalli nasbin maf'ulun bihi. That's how we resolve the issue of ha'ula'i being fixed upon a kasra, but having to be recognized as being mansubun for the purpose of being maf'ulun bihi. We say fi mahalli nasbin. And the third state that ha'ula'i could be in is majrurun. So we can say marra zaydun bi ha'ula'i, bi ha'ula'i. مرة فعل ماض مبني على الفتح. زيد is a فاعل مرفوع وعلامة رفعه الضمة الظاهرة على آخره. Then we have be, Zayd past be, which here means by. It's a harfu jarrin, which therefore ha'ula'i must ordinarily be majrurun. But, and many people become confused here because they look at the kasrah on the end of ha'ula'i and they say, well, it is majrurun. There's a kasrah there, but it's not. Because it's being a majrurun is for an ismun which is mu'rabun. And it's important to remember that. For an ism which is mabniyun, we don't say that it is marfu'un or mansubun or majrurun. So that's not the indicator for it being majrurun, rather that's its permanent state. But here we say that ha'ula'i is an ismun fi mahalli jarrin. We say it's fi mahalli jarrin. That is how we describe ha'ula'i. This example, we would say that ha'ula'i is, we know, an ismun mabniyun ala al-kasri fi mahalli jarrin بحرف الجر بحرف الجر. And similarly for the others, that is how we would describe them. So ha'ula'i in this instance, where it's the fa'ilun, we say ismun mabniyun ala al-kasri fi mahalli raf'in fa'ilun, because it's a fa'ilun here. In this instance it's ismun mabniyun ala al-kasri fi mahalli nasbin maf'ulun bihi, and in this instance it's an ismun mabniyun ala al-kasri fi mahalli jarrin bi harf al-jarri. Now what's important to note is that there are two important differences between التقديري and المحلي, because many people confuse between the two. The first important distinction is that in the second state, التقديري, there is a mani', there's something that's preventing the vowel from appearing on the end of the letter, right? If there wasn't that which prevented it, such as al-alif al-maqsura or al-alif al-mamdudah, such as in asa and al-riba and so on and so forth, if it wasn't for that, then the harakat on the vowel would appear. That's the first important difference. In al-mahalli, where you have an ismun which is mabniyun ala al-kasri or ala al-fatha, then in those instances, it's not that something has prevented the vowel from appearing on the end of the letter. Rather, we say that the entire word, the entire ismun in this instance, is fi mahalli rafin, or fi mahalli nasbin, or fi mahalli jarrin. It's not only that it's the last letter that would occupy that position, rather it's the entire word. So it's important to remember those two differences, and then inshallah ta'ala it will be simple for you to understand. That's what we wanted to mention, therefore, with regards to an introduction to these three different types of i'rab. The al-lafzi that you're familiar with, where it becomes apparent on the end of the word, on the final letter. التقديري, where it is assumed to be on the end of the word on the final letter. And al-Muhalli, where it's occupying the position of that word in its entirety, and not that the indicator is upon the final letter. And we shall conclude on that point. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.